Okay, we're all live and good to go. I now invite the first speaker of Side Affirming to open today's debate.
A world that prefers Ghibli optimism is like throwing a baby in the deep end and expecting it to swim. It's unrealistic, unfair, and a total waste of time. We think we should ignore that entirely. 3 things in the speech then. Firstly, on setup, what exactly does our case look like? What sort of framing do we support? Secondly, an argument on why children aren't likely to understand complex moral messages in Ghibli media that they support. Then thirdly, I want to talk to you about how Disney messages are beneficial for kids. And then Nathan's going to give you an extension on my first argument. Right then, firstly, into a few pieces of setup. Just want to flag sort of the characterization that we've been given in the info side, in the sense that Disney optimism presents a world with firstly clear good and evil, secondly wherein good always triumphs, and then Ghibli optimism presents a world with firstly no time, no true evil, and morality is objective, and then secondly where peaceful compromise is ultimately possible where neither side necessarily triumphs. Just want to note that this good always winning doesn't mean the villain always dying. Rather, it's just the defeat of evil in itself. For example, a villain turning to the good side instead of like fading away in dust. This means that the good still wins, but that these plots can also have moral messages which are far more comprehensible, which is what we're likely to see under their side of the house. What is the purpose of children's media? We say it's to entertain and appeal to the young generation. We say that it gives kids a chance to escape from reality and indulge in the fun of youth. For example, you don't assign The Idiot by Dostoevsky to a 7-year-old. Equally, we don't think that we should give Ghibli media to 7-year-olds to those kids. What do we think children are likely to look like this? We say that it's children up to the age of 10. We say that they are still young and are still developing. This means that they're likely to be impressionable, but probably cannot understand messages that are so complex. We think that in their impressionable stage, we're able to take advantage of this to teach them digestible lessons which they're actually able to comprehend. Now then, onto my first argument on why children aren't likely to understand complex moral messages in Ghibli optimism. A bit of context here. Look, just want to flag like the characterization that we just gave you around how children are impressionable, and that means that they're able to understand things and absorb them really, really well. Ultimately, we tell you substantively that they're not able to understand these messages when they are so complex and when there's so much moral ambiguity to the point where they cannot discern between right and wrong. We think that's ultimately a net harm which they have to deal with the fact that kids are going to be more confused under their side of the house. A number of mechanisms for you today. Firstly then, we say that these kids are probably going to be more interested in the character's hair colour. This means that under our side of the house, when you have Disney characters like, this amazing knight with his amazing hair and stuff, and he goes out to fight evil, then you look at that and you pay attention to that. Ultimately, when you look at these characters and other forms of this Ghibli optimism media, what you're far more likely to experience is just dull characters which you can't really discern right from wrong from. Secondly, we say they don't have enough lived experience to understand these important and these complex things. For example, a 5-year-old probably won't understand the depth and be able to discern for themselves the moral ambiguities that are presented within their case, within Ghibli media. In the sense that you cannot always discern right from wrong, especially when you're a 7-year-old who doesn't know very much in the best case. Thirdly, we say that it contradicts a lot of the learning that they do in school. For example, you're taught that hitting is not allowed and you're not allowed to hit anyone. Ultimately, when you're presented with this message or this lack of message, rather that we're likely to see under their side of the house, is that you see people given oh, maybe it's okay to hit sometimes. The reason this is so harmful is because they cannot choose the right time between when to hit people and when not to hit people. That's something that we'd rather say for later lessons, for when you evolve out of children's media and you start to move into teenage media. In the sense that when we go and read The Hunger Games, we read it to understand. Ultimately, what we see under their side of the house in Ghibli optimism is they watch things that they don't understand and therefore lose touch and lose interest because they do not have any connection to the content. Fourthly, we say that it probably doesn't meet the expectation of what the film is like. Little girls expect a princess in a dress singing her heart out and, facing the villains and trying to defeat evil. Ultimately, when they are not meeting this expectation of what you're typically likely to see in Disney film, which is like just overwhelmingly the most popular media company in the world, in the sense that most of your children's media is dominated by Disney. That means that there's an overwhelming incentive for these little girls and these little boys to be expecting of Disney media tropes, in the sense that you give them something that they're not familiar with and they're less likely to buy into it because they're not familiar with it. Fifthly then, children have low attention spans and only end up seeing snippets of films. Why is it so much worse on their side of the house seeing these small snippets of films? Because what you see in Ghibli media is you cannot see an obvious message, and all you're likely to remember is the dragon flying around. You have to watch the whole film to understand the plot. That's ultimately a net harm, because on our side of the house in Disney media, what you're likely to see is knights fighting evil. Your knights with scars who are out there fighting evil, who have gone through horrible things, are able to fight against the bad people, and you're able to see that snippet of bad. Ultimately, in our worst case scenario, when you don't see lots of buy-in and they do only pay attention to a small snippet of your information and of your media, they see a snippet that is good and that teaches them a lesson that good can fight against evil. What are the harms that they have to contend with in this point? Firstly, that kids are less likely to buy into media. Secondly, they're less likely to take away any important messages that these films might have, in the sense that let's have Ghibli media for teenagers. We don't think it's reasonable to have children indulging in this media if they don't understand it. It's a total, utter waste of time. Why is this exclusive to their side? Why are we not likely to see these same sorts of harms? Because under our side of the house, we show them firstly things that they're interested in, things that they expect. We show them secondly things that are digestible. And thirdly, we show them things that they're probably interested in seeing, in the sense that they like to look at the knight in shining armour, they like to look at these different things. The impacts here then is that we're able to prove that people are much more likely to buy into lifelong lessons that they're able to evolve into. That means that they can go that it operates on a scale, and you slowly move up the scale instead of throwing them straight in the deep end, same as how you learn to swim in a small pool. I'll take your POI before my next point.
By having an artificially perfect role model that you have on your side of the house under Disney optimism, how are you promoting self-esteem for a kid who makes one mistake and now thinks they're the worst person in the world?
I fundamentally disagree with that characterization that it presents a perfect world, in the sense that, what's her name? Elsa is not perfect, in the sense that she's experienced harms in her life. She's experienced traumatic events. But at the end of the day, you're able to see that she was the good guy. We don't agree with the premise of their point, and therefore it falls out and has no relevance. Now then, on how Disney messages are beneficial for kids. Context here. Disney optimism provides essentially single messages and the overall themes for children that consume the forms of media. These messages can tend to be similar things that young children are taught by society. Firstly, children have underdeveloped brain capacity, which means that the simplicity of Disney characters' optimism is able to be comprehended by them. Secondly, children are taught a very similar message in wider society, such as by their parents and their teachers in school. While at this same point in the future, kids are able to learn that these are times where lying is necessary if they've learned that early on. This means that they cannot discern between things that are harmful and things that are bad, and they don't know how to use critical thinking. Ultimately, because we can tell you that we teach these messages and we get you the kids to buy in, I'm so proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. I now invite the first speaker of the negating bench to come up and open their team's case.
Can I run back and forth from the bench because I have a lot of notes?
That's okay.
What? I actually don't have a timeout.
It's your signature move, don't worry.
Yeah, honestly.
Part of the style.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. On side affirming, these kids are presented with a positive role model who is perfect. They are told that if they make one mistake, then they're evil. This has an immense harm that I will expand on later on in my second point. Okay, what I will do for you in my speech today. First, I will do some rebuttal. Secondly, I will cover how outside of the house or Studio Ghibli style optimism benefits children in their sort of real world understanding, but also how this benefits these individuals' self-esteem. My second we'll do a split points on the long-term impacts that these benefits would end up having on children sort of in the rest of their life. Okay, so these children, that was just another sort of note on setup. These children that were defined by side affirming are between the ages of, or up to the age of 10. Okay, so what does this age normally look like? They lack critical thinking skills, right? Because people aren't born with this, they're taught it. They're very, very, very susceptible and easily sort of, I guess, convinced, and their opinions are formed by the media that they consume, right? Which I just want to note that this is not movies versus movies. This is not Studio Ghibli versus Disney, which I feel like that was side affirming's main argument in their debate. This is all forms of media that children are consuming. So this is books, these are podcasts, this is anything that kids are seeing, which is very prevalent in majority of children's lives. Okay, a bit on rebuttal. So first of all, a very sort of sexist thing that was mentioned by First Affirming. Apparently girls expect to see princesses in pretty dresses singing and, I don't know, dancing in movies. That's not true. It's just not. It's not what kids are expecting, especially in a much more progressive society and world that we're in. Okay, also they said that these kids don't have enough real world experience to understand what this outside is teaching these kids. So yes, we agree with that, but we believe that our side is actually creating a better understanding of how the world works. Also, it was mentioned that apparently you guys teach more digestible things, or seem to just be catering more to children. We're still going to be the media will still be catered to children, and I'll get to that later. And it will still be digestible for children. And I don't understand how your example of if a kid tunes into a movie for 5 minutes and it's knights fighting, how is that beneficial to these children at all? Aren't you teaching violence? Okay, on to my point on how this benefits kids in their real world understanding. Okay, so they're seeing that small mistakes don't automatically make someone a bad person, right? Because I understand now that all these decisions and things that happen in people's lives actually are multifaceted, and there are levels of things, and there are multiple things that actually lead up to events happening, right? This is a benefit that they cannot claim, and that side affirming cannot claim, because it's not how the real world works. With Disney optimism, having good and evil, it's oftentimes sort of seen that it's just, this person's good, they never make a mistake, they're always good, they're always perfect, right? I don't think that they can really dispute that. By showing that there isn't one ideal set of morals, we're helping these kids with their critical thinking abilities. So we're teaching them these critical thinking abilities so that they can later transfer that into their lives, which I think Theo will expand on. So this means that children under their side are going to start thinking people are either good or evil. Either good or evil, right? They really do struggle to differentiate between media and real life. Whereas under our side, we're teaching them, people aren't good or evil. And it's very rare that you meet someone, or I don't think you can argue that you'll ever meet someone who's just evil or just terrible, right? These kids are really you, I believe what first said, are easily influenced by the media that they see. So this means that under their side, kids expect people to either be perfect or to just be horrible people. So say Billy, under their side, Billy stole my toy, I hate him, he's a terrible person, he's evil, because that's what the media has been telling them, right? Whereas under our side, he's going to go, oh, Billy took my car. Wait, no, he doesn't actually have any toys. Maybe let's share, or it's encouraging compromise, which is literally stated in the info slide, and that is why it's a unique benefit to our side, right? And okay, so what are some of the impacts of this? Well, we're improving children's ability to critically think, but also their ability to empathize, because we're encouraging not
information.
sort of one side winning. We're encouraging compromises and that sort of thing happening, so they're able to empathize, because that's how you come to compromise, right? By understanding the other person's perspective and their their feelings on situations. Why are they likely to apply this beyond the screen of book? Beyond a screen or a book? Well, yet again, this is a more realistic portrayal of people. So if they're seeing this in their everyday life, they can relate that to the media that they've been consuming or that they've been seeing, and therefore feel more encouraged to sort of implement this in their day-to-day life. Okay, I'll take PLI.
Like, you want to talk a lot about how you manage to gain these critical thinking sort of benefits. How do you gain critical thinking benefits if the content that you're supporting is so ambiguous to the point where kids cannot understand it?
Well, it won't be, because it's especially kids media, right? So they're not going to be doing it to an insane level that kids aren't actually able to interpret it. We're expressing the fact that, you know, there are levels to decisions, there are levels and layers to people and to individuals, and these things all affect like how life goes on for these people, right? So yeah, that's why. Okay, on to my point on how this impacts on children's self-esteem. I just want it to be noted that like children's self-esteem is hugely important, particularly in the developmental stages, which is what was described by side affirming, right? When they were like giving us framing on who these individuals are. So what does this mean? We believe that side affirming actually really harms kids' ability or kids' self-esteem by showing these flawless characters, by showing good and evil characters, right? Because it's in the media and it's in the forefront of what they're learning and stuff. It's creating immense amounts of pressure to sort of be like this character, which I think side affirming has mentioned, right? They want to be like this character. So what does this mean if they fall short? They go, I wasn't like that character, that now makes me evil, right? Because characters who aren't like your main protagonist who's good are normally evil, right? So immediately, because yet again, these kids lack critical thinking under their side of the house, so they're unable to go, well, actually, it was a mistake, that's why. Whereas under our side, they can actually understand, you know, just because I've made a mistake doesn't make me a terrible person. Also, they feel like they're now like a bad individual because, yet again, these bad characters never make mistakes. Under our side, we're showing multiple factors contribute to decisions and like to impact and to other things that happen in their lives. And yet again, one mistake does not define you as an individual or as a person. It doesn't make you good and it doesn't make you bad. Okay, what are the impacts of this? Well, we're showing kids how to like mediate and mitigate like or resolve conflicts and disputes, because yet again they understand that there are like there are other things that impact on decisions and what other people do. Also, self-esteem would affect how these kids are going to interact with others. Yeah, this is why the motion must stand. What was it?
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. I now invite the second speaker, side affirmative, to continue their team's case.
Yeah. It's a good thing.
No.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the best optimism of them all? Disney optimism, that's for sure. Anyway, a few things for you in this speech. Firstly, on the messaging of children and how they interpret this material. Secondly, this idea of perfectionism and how this impacts child's self-esteem. And then thirdly, whether they carry these messages into their day-to-day lives. So firstly then, on this whole idea of the media itself and whether it's digestible for children, note that they conceded on their side of the house that children are not born with critical thinking. We heard no specific mechanisms as to how they actually gain this critical thinking to fully understand all of their media. Note that that means all of their material can fall under that, because that just does not stand. Under our side of the house, what we gave you small, easier, digestible lessons such as good and evil, which which allows us to like take it easily, because what we support on our side of the house is children growing up, slowly ingesting this material. Once they grow up into the like teenage years, they're able to understand, discern like things from like, and understand all of the Ghibli material under their side of the house. We think it's more beneficial for them to discern it as a teenager, because that is when they can start growing their understanding of things. Children of themselves are very limited in their understanding, right? Like children don't understand stuff. That's why we have to teach them at school, like, don't hit people, that's bad. The minute we start being like, oh, you can hit them if they're being really mean to you, or like these like really underlying complex issues, or like when they steal something and you're told like, that's not good, like we think that's really beneficial, because the point at which you tell them from the very beginning that it might be okay to hurt someone depending on the circumstances, this sets a very bad precedent in their minds, because this just like allows them to grow up thinking that it's okay to do all of these things. We would rather have all of these like messages ingrained to them from the beginning, like to not do bad things, to not do evil things to begin with, and that leads to all of that beneficial stuff in the future. So then what else did we hear from there under this like point? Firstly, like we heard on for self-esteem, like heroes under our side of the house are absolutely perfect. No, we want to sense check this, like that just does not exist. Take Simba from The Lion King, like he was an absolute bratty child that wouldn't like, he was a bratty child that wouldn't stop like being rude to all the adults in his life. But what did he grow up into? He grew up into a very nice, respectable, grown-up lion who managed to like get the support of the pride and heard this. We think what that means for the children is they're able to see it. These characters are flawed, so are they. This means that like what this means for all of their material is it's like severely mitigated, because we don't have perfect heroes under our side of the house. That doesn't exist. We think that these small complexities are able to benefit these children, because in a more easy digestible way. So here's why having like a good versus evil overarching story is way better than like complex issues. Firstly, note that like because it's a story of like good versus evil, it sets a big precedent in the child's mind of like they know exactly what to expect in terms of like the good person attacks the evil. But for example, take a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where it took like where at the end, before like the solution was to like kill the Fire Lord, but Aang didn't want to do this. He faced many struggles because it went against his morality in terms of what he wanted to do. For children, when they watch this, it actually gets them to consider stuff, like, and it uses their critical thinking, because they understand that facing their challenges in their lives is not as simple as just like hitting the person that's being mean to you. Rather, you have to think about it yourself, whether it's actually a good thing to hit a person. We think that the overarching story of defeating evil is a way better vesicle to like communicate this idea of like what happens. I'll take a POI now.
Do you believe that in the world of Avatar, we're getting a lot specific, that it is about absolute clear good and evil, considering that so many characters operate within shades of grey?
Yes, like from the beginning of the show, you're just told that the Fire Nation is bad, Avatar is good. Like that's literally how it is. So then onto like this material as to like how children interact with this, like when they grow, or like when they grow up. Or like firstly, when children like see these heroes like grow. Firstly, additional mechanisms to Tyler's point about like Disney messages being beneficial to kids. Firstly, the overwhelming focus on Disney like protagonists is on their like good nature. This means that even when they make mistakes, which they do, as I demonstrated to you before, this like focus is that they are good people in the end. That's very beneficial because it teaches kids that they can be flawed, but they can be good overall, as opposed to just being like a pure evil person that they show as the villain in the Disney movies. Like there's no redeemable qualities to that. We think that is like harmful because nobody wants to be like a villain. We think it's actually beneficial, but this is responding to the material about like looking up and becoming their heroes. We think that it's very beneficial for them to actually look up to these because they have such like good moral compasses as these Disney characters. That means that they look up to them, they want to do the right thing, they want to do the thing like that, as opposed to like under their side of the house, we have more very complex characters that can't understand. They're probably likely to either A, just like it goes straight over their head, they don't understand it, or they mimic the character in such a way that like is just harmful because that character in itself is just quite harmful. So then an additional thing is like Disney optimism teaches kids that triumph over evil is both achievable and desirable, because as we see on their journeys, we see them like having to overcome struggles. Like take Mulan, she had to train as hard as she could in order to be able to join the army, defeat the Huns, like all of that good stuff. And what did that teach little girls that were watching Mulan? It taught them that they can stand up and they can work with they can compete with the boys in terms of like who they are as people. It was really beneficial. We think it's wonderful to have little girls like looking up to Mulan. That's all like really beneficial. So then, let's do a comparison with the worlds, right? Like under our side of the house, what we have is like children are able to understand and learn very simple messagings when they grow up. Once they grow up, like into like 12 years old or teenagers, that is when they start looking into more complex messages. We think that the concrete set of like good versus evil in their minds to begin with is a good initial foundation because that allows them to be good people to begin with as they grow up. Once they learn complexities as they're older, this is much more digestible to them because by then they would have developed their critical thinking skills. Under their side of the house, what they have is they have the expectation that children are born with massive critical thinking. That doesn't exist, as I proved to you before. They need to prove that in order to win this debate. So then onto my extension on how children integrate both forms of optimism into their daily lives. Context, this is the extension. Tyler already gave you material on why children are likely to understand complex moral messages in Ghibli media. I'm going to be extending on how children specifically interact with forms of optimism and how this hides significant. This has significant weight because if I can prove that like children take Disney optimism into their lives, we can win this debate over Ghibli optimism. So firstly then, what do we have to mechanisms? Firstly, Disney optimism tends to be very easy to follow for children. That means they pick it up very easily. Secondly, working Tyler's material here, Ghibli is just extremely difficult to understand to begin with. That means that children don't take it on. Thirdly, because children are able to understand and follow very clearly the plot and the issues, the Disney optimism in media, that means they're able to take it, they understand what happened. This fourthly leads on to people actually putting it into their life. Taking the Mulan example again, if a little girl saw that Mulan could do it, she begins to start training and facing the evils in her life. Maybe the evil that she wanted to face was beating a boy in a running race. That's really beneficial. Outcomes. What do we prove at the end of this point? Firstly, we prove that children tend to take on Disney optimism far more into their lives. This is really important because unlike them, we've shown you that Ghibli optimism, because it's hard to understand, they don't take it upon own their lives. Even if Disney optimism is worse, then that means at least the children are taking on messages rather than being stuck with a complicated issue. We think that children being good, knowing good versus evil, is a benefit on our side of the house.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. I now invite the second speaker, side Negating, to continue their team's case today.
Okay.
To begin, I would like to start with some rebuttals, namely about the role of children's media in our society, how it's confusing kids, knights fighting, before moving on to hitting, critical thinking, and defeating evil in life, before moving on to my substantial point about the long-term impacts of Ghibli optimism on children. Who begin about children's media's job? Children need to learn. They come into the world knowing nothing about anything, and it's our responsibility to teach them, to help them become good adults and humans. If you never go in the deep end of the pool, you will never be able to swim. Whole side point. Additionally, about confusing them, good. Kids are confused by multiplication and broccoli. You have to push them to be better. Digestible is only good if you want to appease kids, if you want to placate them for an hour or two. If you want to improve children's lives, you need to push them beyond their current limits. Additionally, about knights fighting, in your own example, there's an emphasis on fighting, force, violence, absolutes. This is damaging as it doesn't reflect real life. If you are a little kid and you see someone doing the wrong thing, you're more likely to think, I'm the knight in shining hour. I'm gonna go start a fight with that kid. which leads in to the point about hitting. Hitting is bad, obviously, for children to be doing, but they're more likely to go with Ghibli optimism. Why is he hitting me? Where did he learn that? What's causing him to have this crazy disproportionate reaction instead of, ow, what a mean thing, he's mean, oh my goodness, because you're more likely to empathize and consider a situation from multiple points of view instead of a binary good or evil. Additionally, about critical thinking, have to learn critical thinking. Everyone has to learn critical thinking because you don't come into the world with it pre-programmed. And you learn this by having to ask questions, by having to consider multiple sides of a situation, which Ghibli style media gently introduces kids to, and it's an amazing way of starting to build those foundational skills. Additionally, about defeating evil in real life, the Affirming team talks about how triumph over evil is both real and possible, but it simply isn't. Sometimes the best you can do is compromise and find a middle ground, and teaching kids that sometimes things won't go their way and that's okay is so important to their development and to their lives. Sometimes you can't beat that really fast kid in the race just because you're a girl and you're so cool at it. Sometimes that boy just is faster than you. But that's still okay, and it doesn't mean that you're somehow failing. I will take a point of information.
Like, you want to talk a lot of how, you want them to have all these really, really important learnings and how they're really, really beneficial. Even if we buy those learnings are so beneficial, how do you get them to buy into them in the first place?
Well, children are innately interested in the things you put in front of them, and due to how engaging a lot of children's media is and these stories, kids naturally are engaged. Additionally, whenever children are consuming media, they're not consuming this thinking, these are the impacts that this is having on my psyche. This is the moral of the story I am learning. They simply learn it. That's why children's media has such a big impact, which is moving on to my substantial point about long-term impacts of this children's media. As children, they are humans in such a young and malleable state of their lives, and the media they absorb can have massive impacts on their development and how they grow up. This is a bit of a side point, but for example, the children's TV show Teletubbies for toddlers has been shown to negatively influence children's speech development, which negatively influences their performance in schools because they're behind on their peers just a little, which has slight but noticeable impacts on their life outcomes. And that example is for a show that kids are watching for 2 years when they're 4. For this Ghibli media, we are looking at the ages of about 4 or 6 to 11 or 12. So you're getting a good few years in there to influence these children. And they are more affected by the messages they receive than adults are. This is why children's media has so many restrictions and protections as well, because it influences them so much. As such, a child who consumes media with a lot of Ghibli optimism will internalize these messages and absorb them into their still developing psyche. Children carry these lessons well into their adult lives, and these lessons, again, are all about ability to compromise, empathy, and how, sometimes things don't go your way, and that is still okay, and you can still have good outcomes from that. As my first said, I think she got to it, these lessons promote empathy, critical thinking, deeper thought around morality, and so much more. Children who absorb these messages will, at a minimum, play better with peers, be kinder to themselves, be more empathetic, be happier, and have more mental energy for school as well. Zooming out, this results in adults who have good social skills, who are more confident, who are empathetic and kind, who are well adjusted, potentially due to the ripple effect of these impacts in a children's life. Because they do better at school, they get better grades, better jobs, more financial security. Regardless of the scale, we can expect better outcomes, even if they only apply for a few years, which again, we believe they will not. Once again, due to how deeply children internalize these very positive messages. And again, these messages genuinely prepare them better for real world and real life situations than Disney style optimism ever could. Because once again, our world operates in shades of grey. There is no black and white. And so by teaching kids that they are living in a world of greys, it makes them better able to navigate that through both their childhood, their teenage years, and their adult life. This is why proud side affirming, negating, proud side negating.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. I now invite the third speaker, side affirmative, to close on their game. Yeah.
Do we really think it's good that kids learn that, there are different morals and different ways of doing things that are not necessarily correct? On our side of the house, we tell you it's far preferable. Kids take a message, learn set morals that they can then rely on and expand their critical thinking on based off these morals later in life. Who thinks I'm going to be talking about today in my speech? Firstly, on what the messages actually are in both films, and secondly, on whether or not these messages can actually be picked up by kids and what they actually absorb. So firstly, on the messages, we've had some characterizations here that basically, firstly, Disney main characters are always good people who never make mistakes. Nathan challenged this. I'd just like to, reiterate this, that the focus is not on whether or not a person is completely good or not, but rather whether or not they can make mistakes and still be good, because they should ultimately learn from their mistakes. This deals with their outcomes where they tell you that kids feel really bad and, about their self-esteem and they become worse. Instead, we tell you that when they make a mistake, they learn that, it's okay, Elsa made mistakes too, but in the end, she's a good person, she's a hero. I can still be a good person and a hero. The counterfactual in this is that in Ghibli media, it's not always clear what decisions are good to begin with. So kids don't necessarily know it doesn't matter, I should learn and try and become better, because it's not clear in the first place what better actually looks like, which we think is really harmful for kids because they're not certain on what activities should and morals should be prized in society. Secondly, we hear from them is that the bad person was always bad and that this is irredeemable. We like to tell you that this is not true specifically either, but rather that something is always evil and this should be overcome in general. We see that villain redemption arcs exist in Disney films and exist on our side of the house. Why are these so important? Because it tells you that as a kid, there are certain behaviours that are still really bad and really evil, but doing those behaviours doesn't mean that you are irreparable beyond redemption, but rather by looking at these behaviors and knowing that they are bad, you can overcome them, you can become good too. This means that when kids see Billy stealing like their toy on the playground, although they might say stealing's really bad, they also say if Billy can learn not to steal, then he can become like a good person, which we think is really important because it tells kids that certain behaviors are bad, but doing these behaviors doesn't make you bad. Instead, it gives them something to aim for that we think is far better. The comparative here is, again, we're never told that doing certain things in the first place is bad, so kids continue to do behaviors that we don't want them to do. And then we have like good message, and then we have a few more good messages that we think we get in Disney films. So we tell you firstly by having like a clear we have some good messages that we think are prevalent in Disney films. Firstly, that by having evil exist, you should be able to challenge and fight it. We've heard from them that, this teaches kids that, conflict is really bad. You should try and punch someone to get back your right. Okay, firstly, Disney, like a lot of Disney protagonists, are not knights in shining armor. We don't think just by having this singular example, it applies to all kids and teaches them that fighting specifically is something you should aim for. Rather, we see kids like learning all kinds of negotiation powers. But secondly, we tell you that we think it's very important that kids learn to advocate for themselves early in their lives and challenge things that we think are unfair. This is when they grow up in the future to have good ideas of what is right and wrong and are able to continue to challenge them. And then on empathy, we've heard it on Ghibli optimism. We really get this idea of empathy and kindness that for some reason is not prevalent in Disney optimism. Look, we tell you that the main characters of these films, one of their redeeming qualities is that they're really kind and they're really nice and they look to empathize with other people and they feel their pain. This is highlighted as a really good and desirable thing, which kids learn that they should aspire to too. Because often in the end, good things start happening to the main characters when they realize the power of friendship, the power of looking out for other people, the power of caring for others. So we think that empathy is seen as a desirable trait. On the other side of the house, even if characters are able to empathize, they're not shown as specifically a really good thing that kids should aim for, so they don't really learn why they should value it so much. So at the end of this point, I've been able to prove that the messages we have in Disney films are not so bad in the first place, and rather they're kind of morally grey thing. It's not something we should be aiming for. It's not something we should be aiming for and teaching kids to respect. I'll take your point now.
How can we expect adults to understand complex morality if they're never taught it from a young age?
Okay, so we think that teaching the kids and adults when they grow up, they enter situations where stuff becomes more complex. We tell you that in a kid's life, the issues they're facing are not necessarily complex anyway, and that the main problem in their life is often Billy stole my toy. This is not something really complex that requires layers of critical thinking. We've already told you that when kids grow older, when their brains develop so they can actually have the capacity to think critically, this is when they are able to learn these skills. We're happy for teenage media and stuff to have more complex layers of black and white. We tell you it's really important that at a young age kids know what is right and what is wrong, because this forms the ground on which they're going to make their decisions earlier in the future. So now I'm going to be moving on to what messages can be picked up by kids. We've heard that media is going to be really digestible and simple for kids so they can understand. Here I want to highlight the differences between plot and the message of a story, because we tell you that even if the plot is really simple and kids can understand it, they might not necessarily pick up the underlying messages. We tell you that this is particularly true when those messages do not match what they're being told by their parents, what they're being told by their teachers at school and at preschool. So we tell you, because in real life, we tell you that kids in preschool and school are not being told that morality is grey, some things are okay in different situations. The reason they're not being taught this is because kids lack the capacity to realise what situations something can apply to. So when this stuff is being not taught in schools because we think it's bad, we don't think that even if they do get all their positive messaging, it's going to be absorbed by kids because it's not reinforced and they learn certain other things anyway. This means that even if you buy all of their benefits, we don't think it's worth it because kids don't actually take anything out of it. And secondly, again, we tell you that they say, kids like to see what they learn in real life. We tell you that these children's issues are, again, not often morally complex. When it comes to critical thinking, we tell you firstly, when they're really young, their brains do not have the capacity. And secondly, how do we improve critical thinking? We think that at the point We think that at the point where they have an understanding of what is right and what is wrong, that you only get in Disney optimism, that is when they're able to evaluate a decision and say, do we think this is right or do we think this is wrong? Critical thinking is really hard when you don't know what you believe in the first place. The only way to get this, we say, is to give them clear things when they're younger. Then when they grow older, they have these values that they can look back on, that they've very clearly learned, that they've clearly been reinforced in skills. And that's when they can start to look at situations and say, okay, well, he cares about his family. I learned in a Disney film, that's a good thing. So we think to a degree, we can use this to balance out situations. This is an exclusive benefit we can only claim on our side of the house because we're the only side that proves that kids actually have a set of core values to believe in. So at the end of this debate, I think we've very clearly proven that firstly, the messages in Disney films can be super positive. Secondly, those in Ghibli films are often really complex, even if the plots are simple insofar as the fact that kids don't learn morals. And thirdly, that by having these morals, this is where we get the benefits and the outcome, where kids are able to think critically when their brains begin to develop to that stage. At the end, so yeah, thank you.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. I now invite the third speaker, Side Again, to come and continue their team's case.
Loads of kids these days are sitting, being glued to a screen, watching something about Disney optimism. This does absolutely nothing to push these kids beyond their limits and to actually develop their critical thinking skills and things they will actually use in their lives. What am I going to do for you in my speech today? Okay, I'm going to cover 2 points of clash. Firstly, on the impact on children and whether this actually gives them more critical thinking skills. And secondly, on the actual quality of the media and how much children will pay attention to it. Okay, so firstly, we heard got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go quick here. So firstly, we heard it's not clear what decisions are good on our side of the house. Firstly, this has come up a lot in today's debate. I think there are other ways children can tell if something is good, right? You hear from parents, if you hit someone, it's bad. You hear at school, if you hit someone, you're suspended. It's not just a way where you watch something on TV and that automatically becomes the only way you've heard about this thing. It's not true what the affirmative team are claiming. This is, we hear it from other things as well. And we also hear the impacts from the decisions in these films. Generally, if you have a good impact and the kids are that's so cool, I want to be dancing on top of rainbows, then they're probably going to go towards that decision. So they can probably tell if somebody ends up being really sad, they don't want to make the same decisions that character did. So I think that's pretty clear, and there are multiple ways we can tell. So we also heard getting them to consider challenges is a good thing. And we heard Aang the Last Airbender as an example for that. Firstly, I think it's kind of the same on both sides because both types of optimism creates the media which has challenges, right? On our side, you don't just have people who are going in a straight line towards a goal. It's kind of the same for Disney optimism. So I don't really see any difference between those 2 points for each team. So next on how people can copy harmful things on our side because I don't know, they can't see things are bad. So firstly, on our side, each character is not only bad. We don't only see the bad aspects of this. This means that if a child is copying the behavior of one person in our thing, it's probably better than them copying the actions of a villain on their side of the house, right? Because a villain only does evil things, and they actually only show the evil side of the villain. On our side of the house, they have good things, they have bad things. Children will copy both aspects of this. So we actually flip this and see we get more harm if they copy like people on their side of the house because they're like villains who are really bad, right? And next we heard like kids aren't being taught this in school. Firstly, I think it's because they're busy learning other things, right? Like, they have to learn maths, they have to learn English, they have to learn how to read and write. Like, I think just because we don't teach kids in school about morals doesn't mean that, like, morals aren't being taught other places in their lives as well. But also, I think, like, in the Ghibli optimism, the main way morals are actually being taught is kind of like a subconscious thing, right? They're kind of understanding these things without actually understanding it. And this kind of ties into what we heard in first about like how kids don't understand these things. They don't understand a lot of things in life. They just absorb this material as we heard it first from Yune, and they like spit it out when they see it relates to their real world, right? So they don't actually understand a lot of things when they're like the toddler stage because they don't have the brain that's developed enough, and they're more focused on like learning language and other things. So like we don't actually think that they're trying to like understand super complex morals on outside. It just happens. Next we heard like we heard it second, like we never heard any specific mix on how to improve critical thinking. Look back on Yune's notes because we had a whole point on this. We spent like half an hour in prep. That was like a third of our case. So like go back to that. Next we heard like we need to prove children are born with massive critical thinkings. Again, we said this in setup. They are born with nothing. This was repeated at Theo. They don't have any critical thinking skills. The difference on our side of the house is that they're allowed to judge morality and the decisions they make and say, this is good. I should aim to do this because the characters are like having really good benefits, right? They actually are improving critical thinking on our side, whereas on the affirmative side, they're just getting this stuff. They're going like, oh, they're so happy. That's cool. But they're not actually learning anything. They're not saying how they can actually tie this into real life because the reality in like Disney optimism is probably not anywhere near the reality in life, right? We heard this at first, and I think it's pretty well explained. So before I move on, I will take a POI.
When a kid sees in a film that like doing good is rewarded, why would they like not aim for behaviors of surrounding like kindness and empathy when it has good outcomes for kids?
Well, I think that Disney optimism is just so unrealistic. Like the people you see who you're being empathetic towards in Disney films or like Disney optimism doesn't actually represent like the actual situations you see in real life. So on our side of the house, you see people who like you have the flaws, but you also see the good. So like you can actually see how that relates to the real people in today. You're actually able to understand how people have good stuff, they also have bad stuff, and how you can like support them through both aspects of their life, right? That is a unique benefit we can prove on our side of the house. Okay, on to my second point of clash about like how good is the quality of media and how much children pay attention to it. So firstly we heard that like children are impressionable, and this is great, right? We said this in our setup. Children absorb so much, they're in such a young stage of their life that they actually like just absorb everything. So I'm gonna flip this because like we have so much more moral subjectivity that these children can make their own decisions, whereas on the affirmative side of the house, they're seeing like Disney princesses running around and they're like, I want to be just like them. That actually has no benefit because it is not anything like the real world, right? So there's actually not a benefit they can prove. It's not something that shoots down our case either because children being impressionable is a good thing, right? So next we heard like empathy is not exclusive to Ghibli optimism. Firstly, like how much empathy is shown towards villains. Like in Disney optimism, they're probably like the villains always lose, right? Then how much empathy is shown towards them if we're like throwing a bucket of water on them and disintegrating them into a puddle? That's not empathetic. You're killing somebody for like one mistake you made. It's maybe not presented in such a bad way, but it's still a bad thing, right? So I don't think we can say there's loads of empathy on the Disney optimism towards like everyone in different walks of life, which is really important, right? Because you can't just say, I don't like that person, I'm not going to be empathetic towards them, but I like you, so I'm going to be empathetic towards you, right? That doesn't work in everyday life. Next we heard like kids' lives are not complex, so we should like focus on giving it to teenagers instead. Like firstly, kids' lives aren't complex because they don't understand these complex issues. They've still got complex social relationships. Like if you have two kids that are playing together, they probably just don't understand how to communicate properly because they don't like understand how people actually work and all that sort of stuff. So what we're saying is on our side of the house, we're teaching them how people interact in real life because sure, somebody makes a mistake and steals a Hot Wheel car from someone else, but we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, you guys, we can play together, right? That's compromising. That's something we can uniquely claim on our side of the house because on Disney optimism, nobody can compromise because it's like, all the time the villain dies or like gets killed or something. I don't know. So what have I done for you in my speech today? I have covered firstly, the children get a greater critical thinking, right? We also see children just get like a greater view of like the world and how people actually are. This can only be a good thing because children are so impressionable, that means from a very early age, they are not being lied to, that the world is so black and white, you'll just be able to survive if you like follow everyone and like all the people dressed in black are bad, right? So that's like uniquely good. And secondly, like the quality of media, children will still watch this stuff, as Theo said, and like that would just be so much better for everyone in the world because children can now actually effectively communicate. Stand beside negating.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. Now, as is customary, we will reverse the speaking order and cut speech times in half. So I now invite the leader of side of the game to come up and close their team's case today.
That's still unorganized. In today's debate, there are a couple of main points of clash two main points of clash that I've identified, which is the actual quality of this media and then the impacts that this would have on children. And I've identified that the two sort of main paths to victory for side affirming is they've claimed that their media is easier for children to digest and consume. But they also said, we've got flawed characters, and that seemed to be a really massive part of their argument today. I just want to quickly knock that second one out though, and just point out this is not a exclusive benefit for their side to be claiming. We do still have flawed characters. Okay, going on to the quality of media. Going on to how their media is allegedly easier for children to consume. Okay, so like Theo pointed out, they claim that our media is too complex for children to consume, right? Which I just want to reiterate, this is still children's media, so it's going to have very simple plots and all those sort of things, so it will still be in digestible sort of bite-sized pieces for these kids to understand. So I think they made the assumption that, I don't know, for some reason we're going to be feeding them full adult PG-18 movies or something, which just is not the case. Okay, so like Theo said, kids need to be challenged in order to learn, right? That's just a fact. If we want them to just sit down and be quiet for an hour, sure, chuck on a really mind-numbing, easy to digest, I don't know, stupid movie or something. But for media which these kids are seeing in their everyday lives, I want to reiterate, this is not just films, this is books, this is podcasts. These are just stories that their teachers are telling them, right? These are all different forms of media, so it's not just TV. I really want that, to make sure that that's clear in today's debate. They need to be challenged by these things because it's super prevalent in their lives. Also, they said, and the harmful thing of our side is that kids, I guess, don't learn morals. They do learn morals. I want to reiterate the fact that you guys, or side affirming, is assigning what is right and what is wrong, which is an incredibly subjective thing, especially in today's society. But also, they just see a wider variety of morals and stuff under our side and in our media, right? So I don't really think that that ours is that much harder for kids to digest. And even if it is, we're challenging them, so they're going to likely retain that more because they're going to think about it if it's challenged them, right? Which I believe Theo has pointed out. Just going on to the morality side of it as well, just again, kids are in their side, kids are told in the media this is right, this is wrong. But they have other influences in their personal set of morals anyway, so that doesn't make sense under their side, and it's not an exclusive benefit to teach kids what's right and what's wrong because they still have other influences in that. And also we think that there are more benefits to kids being able to choose what set of morals they like more. Also, I just want to weigh the most extreme harms on either side. The most extreme harms on their side is these kids like mimicking the really bad characters or these really villainous characters in their behaviors, whereas the most extreme harm on our side is copying someone who has a couple of complex issues and maybe a couple of harmful behaviors, but because there's not an evil or a good side, they'll have some good and some bad behavior. I believe our main path to victory today is that we teach kids to be better people because they understand the complexity of life, and they also understand how to be more empathetic and understand the layers there are to life, and to decisions that influence other people's behaviors, etc. We are creating better prepared children who are better prepared for the real world, which has flow-on effects, which Theo explained. Proud side, negating.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech, and I'll invite the leader, side of Fernwood, to close today's debate.
We're willing to buy at the end of this that maybe these messages that they're putting into mainstream media, in these forms of media, are so important. But at the point in which these people who this media targets cannot digest this information and are not able to buy into it is the point at which they lose this debate, because ultimately you have to get past the gate in order to access this wealth of information that they want to talk about. Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker is a portrayal of an anti-hero that operates in the extreme grey. He's abused and hated by society and he lashes out in response. I don't even know what the Joker is meant to be or what it's meant to portray, in the sense that these messages that they're probably likely to support are so extreme that we're not able to buy into them because we don't understand it. Giving it to a 7-year-old won't be much better. Few clashes in this then. Firstly, on what do these lessons look like on either side of the house, and then lastly, on can kids actually consume this media. Firstly then, on what do these lessons look like. We heard substantively that Disney is these optimistic characters and they're all perfect. Before the actual clash here, just on framing, we say that's wrong, sense checking, in the sense that they do still make mistakes. It's just clear enough that these kids are able to discern good characters from the bad, in the sense that when we see different Disney films like Elsa making her mistakes, lashing out at her family at the start of the movie, and then at the end it was shown that she was a good person and a hero, that's just an example of the sort of ability to discern from good and bad, just like a sense check on the framing there that they were trying to push back at. We also say that they taught simple lessons of empathy and kindness and goodness. Ultimately, these simple lessons are so important, firstly, because they're not likely to engage in these super high moral critical situations in their lives, in the sense that you don't have to decide between, is abortion immoral and these different really extreme things which you're much likely to engage in when you see this extreme form of media. What you're much more likely to encounter is it good or bad that little Johnny stole my toy? That's much more important, in the sense that these lessons are firstly more important to your day-to-day life, but also in that they're more digestible. They also said they provide unrealistic expectations for these kids, in the sense that you see knights in shining armour. Ultimately, the key response that we've carried out throughout the case is the sense that you're much more likely to buy into the knight in shining armour because it's interesting, because it's what you expect, because media needs to be extreme sometimes to get people to buy into what you're saying. What this ultimately leads to is these lessons being simple, but being simple and extreme to the point where you're able to extract it from the media. Ultimately, what their lessons are much more likely to look like is misleading and unclear. I can't understand the Joker, neither can little Johnny down the road. Ultimately, we say that these lessons are that these extreme representations to get through to the kids are much more important, in the sense that when you give them the representation of the grey, they don't understand it. Our teachings being simple is so much more important than their teachings being potentially deep and informative, in the sense that we're actually able to get through to the kids and we get these important messages through that are, one, more likely to be involved in their day-to-day life, but that they're more likely to buy into. We say that at the end of this point, if we're able to win and show that these lessons are much better and that they're more interesting, then we're able to win this debate, in the sense that kids actually learn stuff and they're able to apply it in their day-to-day. Lastly, on a more minor point on can kids consume these media, we say that we're much better in the sense that we're able to show them things that are really, really interesting. They can show them the knight in shining armor who's interesting, who meets your expectations of what they're likely to go into when they see these forms of media. Because we can get much greater buy-in, because we can ensure these kids learn lessons and take away the most important things to apply in their day-to-day lives and prep them for the important messages that they're about to face, we're so, so proud to propose.
I thank everyone for a fine debate. I invite the debaters to cross the floor, shake hands, and then once you've done that, pop out of the room so the judge can make their call. Really great debate, everyone.
Come to this.